Draw your attention, members, to what is in your pack, which is the ministerial correspondence dated on the 15th of February. Notice of intention to make a statement by the Finance Minister, the written ministerial statement, which is the Public Expenditure Final Plan for 23-24, and the full budget bill and the explanatory memorandum for the bill. Members, the clerk has prepared a briefing note at page 8 of the meeting pack, and let me put on record thanks to the clerk and the broader committee team for working at extreme pace in order to provide us with advice to help facilitate today's meeting. As we know, we have departmental officials here, Joanne, whom we heard from last week, as well as Barry Armstrong, who's Head of Supply, Angela Ross, who's Supply Officer at the Department of Finance. We are keen to get into questions briefly, so I'll ask you to make an opening statement, Joanne, or indeed someone else, but if we could keep it relatively brief, and then we will get into questions on the request for accelerated passage for this budget bill. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, with your agreement, I'm going to ask Barry to make some opening remarks, because Barry's been leading on the budget bill, so he's much closer to it than I am.
And I have some opening remarks prepared here. If you find they're too long, just let me know.
Sorry. Yes, no problem. I will. Don't worry.
Okay. So the Finance
I apologise
Minister,
in advance if I'm blunt about it.
Okay. Finance Minister wrote to the committee on the 16th of February, explaining the urgent need for the budget bill and asking for the committee's agreement for it to proceed using accelerated passage. Departments are currently operating under the authority of the Northern Ireland Budget No. 2 Act 2023, which was legislated for by the Secretary of State in Westminster, and which is based on the 23-24 budget he set back in April of last year. The allocations in that budget fall far short of the funding the departments need based on their forecast expenditure for 23-24, and as a result of this, departments will reach the cash limits set by that Budget Act much earlier than would normally be the case. And in addition then, the timing of the Executive's restoration means that this new budget bill could not be prepared until this late point in the year. DOF's analysis of the cash requirements of departments is there's a real risk that departments could reach their existing cash limits in early March. In normal circumstances, the Executive would agree to a series of monitoring rounds over the course of the last financial year, resulting in a final plan position. Unfortunately, the uncertainty over the total quantum of funding available and the need to wait for the Chief Secretary to the Treasury to confirm the details of the financial package which accompanied the restoration of the Executive meant that it was only possible for the Executive to make a spending decision on the 15th of February. Last week on allocations to departments to address overspends and to provide funding for public sector pay awards. The timing required then to prepare the financial details to include in this bill and for it to be ready to be introduced into the Assembly means that to have delayed its preparation until after that decision would have risked departments reaching the cash limits before the bill could be passed and royal assent secured. The Executive agreed for the bill to be prepared to include headroom based on departments' forecast expenditure and departments' estimated cost for potential public sector pay awards. Doing so ensures that departments will have the authority to spend the budget, which has then subsequently been agreed by the Executive, and all ministers have committed to constrain their department's expenditure, including pay awards, to the budget allocation agreed by the Executive, not by the headroom included in this bill. The introduction of the budget bill would normally follow immediately after the Assembly's consideration and approval of the spring supplementary estimates involving a debate on the supply resolution. Because of the timing of events this year, work is only now able to commence on the preparation and publication of the estimates, so it has not been possible for it to be completed and published before the budget bill needs to be introduced. The Finance Minister therefore intends to bring the estimates documents to the Assembly as soon as work on that has been completed, and officials will be available to appear at the committee at that time to address any questions on the estimates.
That last para, could you just read that again about the Finance Minister?
Right, the Finance Minister therefore intends to bring the estimates documents to the Assembly as soon as the work on it has been completed.
In estimates?
Spring supplementary estimates. So this... because this bill falls at the end of the financial year, we would normally have spring SSE with this. Yes. While it is always necessary for a finance bill to proceed via accelerated passage, because of the urgency it exists and the risks of departments reaching their cash limits, the Finance Minister is also asking the Assembly to suspend Standing Order 42.5 to allow this budget bill to complete all stages in less than the normal minimum of 10 days. I'm conscious of time. I had intended to go through some of the results of the review financial process.
I think we can probably wait for that. The review financial process, because I took very good evidence from you, Barry, on that in the previous finance committee. It is really important. I'm aware that it's... but go on ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's just because this is the first bill brought to the Assembly since the review financial process, but we can come back to that if you prefer. Just one last point I was just going to highlight was normally, as well as authorising expenditure for departments for 23-24 financial year, the bill also provides a vote on account to allow departments to continue to deliver services into the early months of the incoming 24-25 financial year. It's important to stress this does not constitute setting the 24-25 budget. That budget setting process will follow once the Executive has agreed its 24-25 budget. It will be brought to the Assembly to consider with the 24-25 main estimates and the Budget Number 2 bill. To allow Ministers time to fully consider their department's financial position and ensure that information provided in the budget exercise reflects their priorities, the timescale for agreeing a budget for 24-25 will be slightly extended. It is possible, therefore, that the Assembly may not have been able to complete its consideration of the Budget Number 2 bill before the summer recess. In order to remove any risk to the Department's cash position and to ensure that the Assembly is not curtailed in the time available to it, the Executive has agreed to seek a larger than normal vote on account to ensure that it will be sufficient to last until after the summer recess. So while the normal level of a vote on account would be set at 45% of the previous year's provision, this budget bill contains a vote on account set at approximately 65%. So just to conclude then, it's a very exceptional situation that we find ourselves in so late in the financial year, and I and the Department can assure you that we do not ask this lightly. The Minister is very cognizant that it restricts the scrutiny and consideration that the Assembly is entitled to give to the bill, and she assures you that this will not in any way be regarded as establishing a precedent.
Okay, thank you, Barry, for that. I mean, as in the nicest possible way, and Barry, taking evidence from you before, and your team works very hard, Joanne works very hard. I suppose it's worth saying, in one sense, we have heard that before from previous ministers. That is, people who sit in finance committees, becomes like it's almost a cliche now. But you talked about the real risks of running out. Which departments or statutory bodies have specifically said they're about to run out of cash, and will run out of cash in the next 10? Because presumably, suspending Standing Order 42.5 means that they need the allocation, or they need the legal authorisation increased by whatever 10 days time from now. Otherwise, they'll run out of cash. Are there ones who have specifically said in the next sort of 10 days we are literally not going to be able to keep the lights on?
I would say that the management of the cash draw can't be exact down to the nearest pound, but certainly there are two departments that I would highlight that we think are at most of risk in the immediate future. It's Department for Communities and the Department for Education. Okay. By significant sums. I can't give an exact date to say yes on this particular date. That will definitely happen, because it'll be very much down to the timing of invoices and bills to be paid. Yeah. But they are two where the amount of money involved would be very significant, and they are likely to be at risk from the early part of March.
If they're at risk in the early part of March, they're kind of operating at risk, but they aren't. I mean, like the idea of literally the lights going out, because we're talking about Standing Order 42.5 shortens the scrutiny period by days. Now, there's a separate debate about how well we scrutinise budget bills. It's effectively impossible to properly scrutinise a budget bill unless there's a budget that's been drafted that you're actually testing it against. But I suppose the question I'm asking is, realistically, for the sake of the extra few days, is the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance, or indeed the Chief Executive of the Education Authority, are they literally going to have to say, right, I am ordering school Y on such and such road to shut off the lights because I can't send the kids home, turn the heating off, we can't afford. I just think it's really important that we understand exactly what it means. If it's for the sake of an extra few days at which the accounting officer of the department is able to say, we are operating at a theoretical legal risk, but it is clear that an assembly in which basically, 80 out of 90 of the MLAs are in executive parties, there is no real risk. We are not going to pass we're not going to authorise the spending.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, it might be useful, and I know the committee has asked for a briefing on how the consolidated fund works, and it might be helpful to go into that at this point. Yeah. The funding that we get from Westminster flows from the Northern Ireland office into our Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund, which is, in all intents and purposes, a bank account.
Yep.
We cannot get the money out of that bank account into departments' bank accounts unless it is authorised by the budget bill. So we keep a track of what departments' limits are set in the previous budget bill. Once they reach that limit, we cannot pay money from the Consolidated Fund into the department's bank account. And that is what the risk is. As Barry says, it's not an exact science working out when any department will run out of that cash, because there's a number of factors in there, but it is the fact that we cannot get them cash from the Consolidated Fund into their own bank accounts.
Okay, so on spending, well, actually not on the 65% voting account, effectively the position is that we are kind of concertining this budget bill, and we're having sort of minimising scrutiny. Now, we put forward arguments, fair enough, but we're minimising scrutiny on this piece of budget process, and we're then saying, well, we'll have a lot. It looks like we're already saying that we're going to breach the obligations in the Northern Ireland Act for having a budget for the start of the financial year. So one deadline, we're being compressed as MLAs to rush this through. But then we're also saying, but the executive can have a lot longer to produce a draft budget. So there seems to be a slight.
Well, I suppose the first thing to realise is these are all circumstances which are not of any of our making. We had been pushing the Northern Ireland office from end of November to say we needed a budget bill through urgently. Yeah. Obviously circumstances, and you can understand why they wouldn't want to take that through when it looked like the executive was coming back, which did indeed happen. We didn't know how much funding was available for 23-24 until we got the letter from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury on the 13th of February. We could not have progressed this budget bill any quicker than we did do. In relation to the 65% voting account and the timing for the budget, we had been working on a budget process, but as you'll understand, that was without ministers in post. We had asked for information from departments, but that was based on permanent secretaries' views of the world. I think it's only right and proper that incoming ministers have time to consider their department's financial position. So we have extended that slightly, and the executive has agreed. We have went out and asked for updated budget information from departments by the end of February, which is still a very, very tight timescale, with a view to the finance minister bringing recommendations to the executive in early April. So we are moving at pace to do this, but I think it's right that we give ministers their time to do that. These are very unusual circumstances, and it's not something we would ask lightly. The reason for the 65 voting account is to make sure we're not sitting here with the main estimates saying the same thing to you, to ensure that there's proper scrutiny after that, and that's why we're asking for that.
Thank you. We'll go to the Deputy Chair, Diana Forsyth.
Yeah, thanks very much. And really my question, just to highlight it again, was on Wednesday you'd indicated, I think it was in the back of Steve Aiken's question, that we were looking at 45% vote on account, whereas now it's 65% as it came through in the weekend. I just wanted to ask why.
I thought I had said 65. If I said 45, I misspoke, because 45 would be our normal voting account that we would always seek. I thought I had said 65, but I may have misspoke.
In fairness, you did say a little bit higher than 45, John. You did say a little bit higher. Yes, yeah.
65.
No, that's grand. Thank you. Just on clarity. And in terms of then the Treasury management going forward, you're talking about the 65%, and you're hoping that to get us through to the other side of summer recess. What exactly is the process in terms of the Treasury management going forward on a monthly basis?
Well, firstly, I think we would still hope to become before summer recess. It's just to allow that little bit of wriggle room, for want of a better word. The Treasury management on a monthly basis, we are constrained. The amount we can draw down into the Consolidated Fund through the block grant is set in the Northern Ireland Office estimate at Westminster. And the Treasury management process, the same thing applies. That voting account will set departments' limits, and they cannot draw down cash in excess of that voting account, and then the main estimates will bring that up to the full level.
Yeah, and it was just really from the perspective of if we're approving this going forward on a vote on account before ministers have set the programme for government and the forward-looking budget, is there a risk that departments could spend a lot in these coming months, or are you content with the controls in place?
No, I think we're content with the controls in place. That's why it's not the full 100% of last year's budget. Plus, every minister and their accounting officer and their finance director knows that they're actually constrained by the budget totals, as they are when we built the headroom into this estimate. It gives the legislative authority, it is an absolute limit, it is a maximum, but everybody knows that they're constrained by the budget that's set, and the executive will bring that forward hopefully very quickly.
If I could just say it, in terms of the 65% and the thinking, in terms of whenever we were providing advice to the Minister to go for a 65% vote on account, it was very much in our minds to make sure that the Assembly and the Committee actually have time to consider that budget, because what we didn't want to be doing is coming to you at the end of May or beginning of June saying we've only just now got the budget finalised, but by the way there isn't going to be time for you to properly consider it and try to rush it through. So it wouldn't be that a budget bill wouldn't be brought to the Assembly, but when conscious that for the committee to take its time to consider it, and then for the Assembly to be able to properly consider it, that it will have been introduced, but it might not have been able to complete all its stages before the summer recess.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Steve Aiken.
Yeah, so thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, team, this is very unsatisfactory to say the least, and as sort of other members of this committee, we've gone through this process time and time again. The one thing that really bothers me this time is about the spring supplementary estimates. Not seeing them, not having had height of them. The idea that the Minister might bring them to us at some vague time in the future, quite frankly, really bothers me. And I would like to have a more definitive timeline. And I want to know why we haven't at least got an outline of the spring supplementary estimates, because what we're being asked to do is to approve a 75% vote on an account budget going forward on something that doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, we haven't sight of it. You're asking us to make a fundamental decision about £18 billion. That's it, Chair. That's £18 billion we're being asked to make a decision on with insufficient information.
I'll let Barry speak to the timetable for the spring supplementary estimates. I would agree with you that it is not an ideal process and is far from satisfactory. Unfortunately, things have conspired against us. The Executive set its final plan budget for 23-24 last Thursday. The spring supplementary estimates requires us to get the detail of those spending plans, and we need to break it down into individual lines to produce the document. You'll appreciate the thickness of the document. I think everybody has said before what a comprehensive document it is, and that has to be printed. That's not something that can be turned around overnight. So Barry can speak to the timescale of that, but it is not that we wouldn't have wanted to do it. We absolutely wanted to do it. To speak to the vote and account, I'm afraid you're always asked to do a vote and account before a budget is finalised. Unfortunately, this year there's going to be a bit of a bigger gap just to allow incoming ministers time to consider their financial position. But Barry, you want to speak to the timescale for the SSEs, because your team will be doing them.
The SSEs will come to this committee and will come to the Assembly in March. In March. my team literally
Beginning or end of March?
It will be before the end of March. We will not have it at the beginning of March, because it is just not achievable to produce the document at that level. Bearing in mind, if I can stress as well, ministers got their funding envelopes confirmed to them on Thursday, so they are now still considering the detail of how those funding envelopes are to be used. So we're that still has to go through for us to then to get that detail recorded so that it can be put into a publishable document. But we will have it for you in March, and officials will be up to explain the document before it's brought to the Assembly.
Thank you. Jerry Carroll.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ed. I'm sure a lot of concern of Steve Aiken. I think it's a completely unacceptable process we're asked to endorse today. I mean, we're supposed to scrutinise a key aspect of our role as MLAs, and this committee is to scrutinise, and there's questions that I have, and I doubt many of them can be answered today, never mind including the public in the process, which this shouldn't be.
Apologies to the committee, I need to go and chair the next bit.
It should be just the ministers and the executive agrees a budget, and then MLAs rubber stamp it. This should be a process where the public are engaged in. And it's up to them to determine whether ministers are making the right decisions or not. We have essentially made a few hours to scrutinise this at best, and it's a lot of money, as has been said, and then rush it through on the floor, and that have opposition and issues with that. Sure, I'll come on to after. And I think really we're being asked to play fast and loose with people's lives in terms of the scale of money, the speediness of which is this rush through, and serious questions that people have. I mean, a note from the Minister of Finance in our pack, I'm not sure if you've seen this bit of evidence or documentation. It just states it's regrettable that the Executive was not in a position to fund the full circa £700 million of estimated pay costs identified by departments, and then it goes on. So basically, we're being asked to endorse this. There was a lot of sort of statements to say that the new executive will fund public sector workers and their pay demands, but by the Minister herself, she's admitting that there's not enough money there. So how do you expect, and I appreciate it's not all you're doing, I blame primarily the British government and the DEP for keeping this place down for so long. So I don't think it's officials' fault as such, but do you reasonably expect MLAs to be able to scrutinise the heftiness and the detail that's in front of us today?
Can we just say, guys, we need to keep this to questions, just to members, because this is, we have time we'll have lots of time, I promise, to speak on this budget bill in the next day or two, and then we'll go to Philip.
I agree it's not an ideal process. Unfortunately, just circumstances have conspired against this. In terms of the not being able to fund all the pay awards, we did have a finite pot of money that came from the British government to enable us to fund both pay and overspends, and the executive has made its decisions on that, and a written ministerial statement was issued by our minister which set out how that funding had been allocated. I cannot argue that this process is ideal. Obviously, time to scrutinise is what is necessary, and hopefully going forward we'll be in a position to do that.
What, at this stage, with these spring supplementary estimates in this budget bill, what should have happened is an executive should have set its budget a year ago. We should have then had a series of in-year monitoring rounds. At each of those stages, the committee would have been briefed on those, and there'd been engagement with the committee on the expenditure decisions that they contain. So by the time we come to this should be just putting the legislative authority on that whole series of processes for which there would have been engagement with the committee, not just this committee, but each department with its own committee. But as Joanne said, this is something that's been forced on us by the timings this year.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask then, on the back of Jerry's question, which outstanding public sector pay awards have not been included then within the affordability envelope and then by the statement set out by the Minister on Thursday?
Every department has received funding for some of the pay awards that it identified. It wouldn't be right to cut across the decisions of the executive and go into individuals that weren't, but every department has received funding for pay awards, and those departments that are in overspend has received funding for that overspend. It's now for individual ministers to decide how that money is distributed. So they've received one resource DEL allocations. It hasn't been split between pay and overspend. They can manage that through the remaining weeks of the financial year.
The Minister's written statement said that she regrets the fact that this will not settle all outstanding pay claims. So given that the Minister has said that it will not settle those claims, can you give us details then of, in the Minister's view, what claims won't be settled?
I think, to be fair, departments have asked for more money than was available, and the executive has made decisions on how that should be allocated. There is also, there's what unions' expectations would be and what is actually going to be possible within the funding envelope. The funding envelope that was received as part of the financial package would not have been enough to cover every department's ask, and nor would it be enough to go close to what unions would expect. That's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Nicola Brogan.
Thank you, Chair, and again thanks to the three of you for coming in and making that briefing this morning. And I do appreciate that you are working under exceptional circumstances, and I appreciate the fact that you are working at pace to bring this here forward. And I suppose I just want to ask, if this budget bill wasn't granted accelerated passage by the committee or by the Assembly, like, what consequences would that have on departments, and in particular, as Jerry and Philip have already raised, on public sector pay and that announcement last week from the Minister of 688 million? Would that put that in jeopardy, essentially, if this didn't receive accelerated passage?
To be fair, yes, it would. As I said earlier, there will be some departments where we will not be able to move money from the consolidated fund into their bank accounts. In relation to the public sector pay, it may be that the cash paid over for public sector pay awards doesn't actually happen until next financial year, just down to timings. But for an accounting officer to start pay negotiations without knowing it has the Assembly's authority to spend money on those pay awards, I think would be a very difficult decision for an accounting officer to take. So yes, I think it could put it in jeopardy if this didn't proceed through the Assembly.
Okay, and also obviously the examples you gave earlier about the Department of Education and Department of Community as well, they're putting them under serious pressure.
I'd say those are two of the departments that I think are at most risk most early. Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I will look forward to some information on the consolidated fund, because it is very detailed, and for people watching on, I suppose it is too, so we'll appreciate that.
It is, yeah. Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the officials for coming along today. Because I know, look, it is an unsatisfactory process, but you have had to work at pace as well, and just I think it's right that we recognise that. In terms of the vote on account, and whilst I appreciate that it's to give the ministers and this committee and the Assembly space for proper scrutiny, would just emphasise that it is important that that process moves at pace, because we know that it's 65% of a budget last year, which was already insufficient in some cases, and so there were freezes on recruitment, etc., which can only be unlocked when we have the actual budget. So just to put that on record. The only other question, and look, I welcome the clarity around Nicola Brogan's point on public sector pay. What is your assessment at this stage of what our risk of underspend in terms of capital and resource might be at 31st of March?
I would hope that the risk of underspend is low. We have allocated all of the capital funding we have available. The executive decided on that last week. All of our resource funding has now been allocated. We do need to be very careful about that, and we will be working with departments to monitor it as we go through the year. We will have the usual carry forward arrangements on capital Dale, but unfortunately, because the additional funding, the financial package came through reserve claim, we won't have that carry forward under the budget exchange for that. So we have asked, and Minister have agreed, the executive, that departments keep in touch with DOF and inform us of any underspends that are emerging.
Perfect, thank you.
Another question is Paul Frew.
Thank you. And again, I like Nicola and Owen. I have deepest sympathies for you guys. You've been put in this position through no fault of your own, so I get that 100%. Can I ask that, I take it that you would have had a financial paper going to or already been at the NIO before the executive was reformed. If that is the case, is it different from the one that the Finance Minister now has given to the executive?
In terms of 23-24 allocations, we did send a paper to the executive and to the Secretary of State earlier in the year on mostly on capital allocations. The Secretary of State decided not to make any capital allocations on the basis that that funding could be used to address underspends. We haven't sent one on the end of the year. The problem with the budget bill, while we've been pushing the NIO to take a budget bill through from, as I say, sort of late November, early December, we had no clarity on what funding would be available. So one of the big questions for the Northern Ireland office was, what are you going to do about the level of overspends that departments have? So we couldn't have prepared a bill because we didn't at that point know what funding was available. It was only last week that we got actual confirmation from the Chief Secretary of the Treasury of how much funding we were getting.
Okay. Within this bill for next financial year, the 65%, and again I get that, it gives you a wee bit more latitude going forward, a wee bit more time with regards to budget number 2 bill, which I'm sure will be fun. But is there any violence done to any department, any minister's department here that we should be concerned about? You know, have we taken, is it just a copy and paste from last year's budget running over and it's the 65%?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
It's a purely mathematical formula. Because to deviate from that at all would actually be stepping into decision making and actually setting a budget.
Yes.
And that's very definitely not what this is. So this is just a mathematical formula. 65% is applied to the provisions that are in the bill for 23-24, and then that's provided for 24-25.
So there's been no real scope then exercise done on need with regards to departments, with regards to staff members, with regards to pay uplift?
That will all be part of the budget setting process as opposed to the vote on account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, you've indicated here that communities and education are the two departments that are at risk of running out of money. Have they indicated why they're at risk?
It's basically because the spending profile that they're on for the 23-24 year is significantly higher than what was in the budget that the Secretary of State set back in April of last year. And we have been monitoring their forecast expenditure on a monthly basis, so it's been clear that they have been on a spending profile that's higher.
It's worth saying, particularly because it will be of reference to the Department for Communities, the budget bill doesn't just cover their DEL spend, which the executive side, it also covers annual managed expenditure, so benefits, etc. So it just needs things to be being paid out more quickly.
Yes.
You know, for a department with a big budget outside its control.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting then, because it's obviously the output then on the Department of Communities that could affect more people, not just staff members.
Yes,
that's right, and timing wise as well, because for a lot of departments, the big cash requirement comes at the end of the month, frankly, to pay salaries. Department for Communities is different in that the benefits are required to be paid on an ongoing basis throughout the month, housing benefits and and others. So you're quite right that would be a risk.
Would logic apply then that if they're running out of money in this financial year, and what we've basically done is to add a copy and paste over to next year, and 65% is ongoing, which should get us to the summer?
It's 65% of the new totals now. So it's not 65% of the Secretary of State's budget that he set back in April. It's 65% of the totals that are now in this new bill.
Yeah, which there's been no real deviation or change though.
Other than departments getting any overspends and getting the money for pay into these new totals, because we've built in the headroom, there's money in there, and the 65% should be plenty to get departments through until a budget bill and a main estimates and associated budget bill goes through. We don't foresee under the 65% any department running out of cash in those circumstances. It just gives us a bit of extra room to let the executive take decisions on the budget, and there should be sufficient there for departments.
I understand why we wouldn't run out of money if we have 65% of our budget going forward, but was there a risk of departments next year running out of money if we'd set it at 45%?
Well, not if the budget was set in the normal time scale and the budget number 2 bill and main estimates were brought to the Assembly in the normal time. It's about the timing of the budget and the budget bill, not about the spending profile, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. And there's no further questions down? No. Okay, so thanks very much to the officials for the session, and so to advise members then that under Standing Order 42.2 the committee must decide if there has been appropriate consultation with it on public expenditure proposals contained in the budget bill. If the committee is content, accelerated passage for the budget bill 2024 will be granted, and I shall write to the Speaker accordingly. If not, then there will be a committee stage and a delay.
Chair.
Jerry Carroll.
Yeah, Chair, I'll be voting against this because I don't think there has been proper public consultation for some of the reasons that I've outlined, and I think the first test of this Assembly of Scrutiny, it's been a failure, and it's we haven't got enough time to scrutinise and go through the detail of what's in this. Some of the stuff that have raised already around public sector pay is quite concerning because it doesn't meet the aspirations that people wanted when they put pressure on parties in this place to get back together. So for that and longer reasons that I'll outline probably in a debate, I don't think this committee should be given accelerated passage.
Thank you, Deirdre Hardy.
I would propose that we do, for the circumstances set out, because we don't have the luxury of time, notwithstanding, yes, that you would want to do the normal scrutiny, and I think in fairness to the department and even the Minister has stated that. I think if we do get the financial estimates in March and stuff in terms of looking at this going forward, but officials have clearly set out the impact that this would have on citizens, and my concern would be, particularly in the likes of communities and education, it would be the most vulnerable within our communities. And also including public sector pay as well. So I think on that basis, in terms of balance in this, that we should go ahead and allow accelerated passage.
One Tennyson.
Yeah, if you need a seconder for that, Deputy Chair, happy to second Deirdre's proposal. I think it would be reckless and irresponsible, frankly, not to grant accelerated passage given the consequences potentially for departments and in terms of public sector pay. So I think at this stage we have no option but to grant accelerated passage.
Yeah, and again, I am completely with Deirdre and Owen on this with regards to with no other choice. But what I have always took exception to is the actual question itself. We have not had appropriate levels of scrutiny, but that's the way the question is set, and there's nothing we can do about that. So, it should be from this committee. It should be a qualified agreement for accelerated passage, because quite frankly, it would be daft to say that we've had appropriate levels of scrutiny. But we cannot afford for this bill not to go through at this stage.
And if that's all.
Chair, if we proceed to the question, Ms Hargy has indicated that she's willing to act as proposer, so if you want to go ahead.
Okay, the question is that the Committee for Finance is content that there has been appropriate consultation with it in respect of the public expenditure proposals covered in the Budget Bill 2024 and is willing to grant the requested accelerated passage for the bill.
So if we can have those for the motion.
Raise hands.
No. Yep, just raise hands. So I have Ms Forsyth, Mr Frew, Mr Tennyson, Ms Brogan and Ms Hargy. Those against, I have Mr Carroll. We have anyone is abstaining? No, we have run out of people to do that. So in that case, the motion is passed. If members are content, we can move on then.
Okay, so yeah, staff will record the decision for the minutes, and is that from me or Matthew then writing to the speaker?
It'll go out in the chair's
Yeah,
name, and I
okay.
literally have it on an email now, ready to wing away.
Confirm that the chair of the committee will write to the speaker with the committee's decision in respect of the budget bill 2024. So moving on to agenda item number 5, any other business? Does anyone have any other business they wish to?
We just hope that the internet doesn't crash now.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just the next item, the next committee meeting is scheduled for Wednesday the 21st of February at 2 p.m. in room 21 Parliament Buildings. And the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn.
Members, we're now adjourned. The button will be pressed.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.